When I entered seminary, I went from studying, at LSU, I was studying engineering. I was attempting to study engineering. I went from 3 years of engineering at LSU, and when I entered seminary, my degree changed from an engineering degree to a liberal arts philosophy degree. So basically, two things happened. Number one, I lost like most of my credits whenever I transferred. I think I had something like 15 or 16 math classes in English, between math, science, engineering classes, physics, chemistry, those kind of things. They were useless whenever I moved in and transferred. But like one of the big things is like the mental shift is something that like I underestimated because I went from studying a STEM field, right, math, where calculus 1, 2, 3, physics 1, 2, 3, differential equations that have failed horribly. My professor actually looked at me and goes, I asked him, I said, what do I have to do to pass this class? His response was, sorry. I'm like, that's not good. But they're like in all of my classes, like when I transferred and shifted, it was going from a math analytical kind of stuff to whenever I entered seminary, it was a liberal arts degree. So it's very reading and classics and writing and papers instead of like I was used to taking tests and exams and like doing math problems for practicing math problems for homework, and then now I have to read and I'm writing 15-page papers for like my finals, right? So it was just a little bit of a shift, and I remember that first semester in particular, there was a little bit of a struggle, and one of the big things that I had like lost the sense of doing was whenever you write a paper, one of the most important things when you write a paper is to first develop your thesis. Right? Your thesis statement, right, usually found in the introductory paragraph of a paper, will tell you what the rest of the paper is about. It becomes like the lens by which you look at all the rest of the paper. Right? So you develop a good thesis statement. It doesn't matter if the paper is 3 pages, 5 pages, 10 pages, 15, 20 pages. It doesn't matter because you have a good thesis that like kind of focuses everything else that you're going to write. Right? So I say that because this is when we look at today as we're kicking off and as we're now into ordinary time, the church, right, invites us during ordinary time. It's not plain time, it's not boring time, but ordinary time is meant to be the time that we reflect on the life of Jesus, his public ministry. Right? So especially as we're at the beginning of ordinary time, last week we started off with the baptism of the Lord, right? Jesus' revelation of who he is, right? Your beloved Son of the Father, right? That's the whole thing. Today, what the church does is that they give us kind of the thesis statement or a lens by which we're meant to look at everything else Jesus does. It's not an accident that we look at the wedding at Cana and this miracle, right? The first of all of Jesus' miracles, as John says, right? This is the first time that he really started to reveal his glory to everybody, right? This is his first mighty act. That like, it's really the thesis statement or it's the lens by which we look at everything else that Jesus comes to do. Everything else that Jesus is meant to be. And I think it's important because if the church, like if the whole purpose of Jesus' coming would have been to be like a revolutionary, right? Like to speak up for the little guy and like to overthrow governments and stuff, then it probably would have been better for him to like do some kind of an uprising or a revolution or trying to like speak truth to power or whatever, right? Or telling off the Pharisees like he's going to do later on in the Gospels. But he doesn't start there. If the whole point of Jesus' coming, right, is just to like overthrow the devil and like to show his might against the devil, right, then maybe like at the very beginning of his ministry or the first miracle that he does would be like this public exorcism or something like that, but that's not what he does. If it was just for him to be like a guru and just to like share like some good wisdom, like wisdom from the Father, right, all this kind of stuff, maybe it would be like a big sermon or something, but that's not where he starts. If it would be just to like show, I'm here to be like God, like the divine physician and show that God has dominion over the created order, then maybe like it would be like a crippled person, a blind person, and a deaf person, and just like heal, and we're good, and like it just reveals something about him. Like Jesus is going to do all of those things, but he doesn't do all those things right away. The first thing that he does is he makes sure that there's wine at a wedding, which tells me that he's probably Cajun, first of all. But secondly, right, and more importantly, right, there's some depth behind this miracle. There's a lot of depth behind this miracle. Because God has said, like Jesus is revealing something about his mission, something about who he is, who he's come to be, and who he wants to reveal God as to us. So if we look at the story itself, right? It's really an interesting thing because for us to understand the real impact of what happens, we got to understand a little bit about Jewish culture. So like a Jewish wedding celebration took place over the course of about a week, right? 5, 6, 7 days, somewhere in that range. And over the course of a week, there were like a bunch of different celebrations that would take place, and the betrothal and all these other kind of things, right? Until you would have like the big feast, and it was an ongoing feast of just a celebration that would happen for a long time. Again, I think the Jewish people are the predecessors to the Cajuns, but that's me. But like it's just over the course of about a week, there was just a lot that would go on, right? So you had to feed these people. You had to have your libations. You had to have all of your food. You had to have all of your drink. You had to have all of your stuff. So when the issue that arises of the wine running short, it's actually a twofold image, right? There's actually a twofold disgrace, if you will, that would have been like kind of assumed by the person. Number one is that you didn't have enough like to feed and to give alcohol to all of the people that came to celebrate, right? You didn't have enough drink for everybody. So it was like a little bit of a disgrace, like, oh man, you messed up. You undershot who you thought was coming. It's kind of like a status kind of thing where like, can you really afford to have such a big feast for this thing, right? So that would have been the first thing. But the second thing is like, and a little bit more subtle, is that it's also kind of would have been seen as a bad omen to the couple. Like you can't even feed all these people. Can you really take care of yourself? Right? It's like you can almost hear the gossip of like the people like in the background, like the little old lady sitting at the table in the back of the wedding, just like, I don't think, like this ain't gonna last kind of thing, right? Like that's kind of what's going on here is that you have this kind of like, number one, this, you can't provide for the people that are there. And then number two, there's almost like a bad omen. Like this is how the wedding's gonna start, good luck, right? Like as the relationship develops. So Mary sees what's going on. Mary looks at Jesus and says, they have no wine. And then they have this back and forth. And we could go on a tangent and talk about Mary and Jesus' interaction where Jesus calls his mom a woman. He ain't getting in trouble, don't worry. This like is actually a harken back to Adam and Eve and the woman and the new Eve. And there's a lot of beautiful parallels there. But if we talk about that, then I'm not going to talk about the other stuff. But so it's just a really beautiful spot. Don't worry, Jesus didn't get a whipping and didn't like insult his mama. That's the key. Right? So after that, what happens is that Jesus, he says, there are 6 stone jars, bring those jars and fill them with water. Now, these jars, when we think of a jar, we might think of like a clay pot. They're stone. These things are heavy. They're big, right? And the purpose of these 6 stone jars, each holding 20 to 30 gallons of water, was that they were used for Jewish ceremonial washings, as we heard. So basically, when a Jewish person would come into a banquet, right, they had to clean themselves. They couldn't, there was like a certain ritual kind of cleaning that they would do so that they could come in. So they're washing their hands, they're making sure like it's dusty, like they're getting all of the dust, all of the dirt off of them, right, as they come in. So this water is not clean water. Like this water is actually gross water. It's bath water, essentially. And Jesus says, fill them up to the top. He doesn't say clean them out, empty them, and wash them clean, right? Like, no. He says, just fill them up to the brim, right? So fill them up to the top. That's the water. And then what he does is they take a ladle and they serve it out. And he says, bring that to the head waiter. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody's going to look at a bath water and dip it into, like take a ladle, put it in bath water and then say, go bring it to the head person. If I'm the person that's waiting on this, I'm like, dude, you better know what you're doing because I'm going to get beat up, right? Like I'm going to get in trouble for this. But I think it's very important that there's twofold here, right? Number one is the setting which for us to really understand what Jesus is trying to say, we need to understand the setting, the importance of the setting of it being at a wedding. And the second thing is that water. Muddy, gross water. When we think about a wedding, why is it that we go to weddings? When we think about going to a wedding, even today, I'm not thinking about 2,000 years ago, but when we think about going to a wedding today, we go because we see something in the person. We go sometimes because we're dragged there and we have to go, right? Because I don't really want to go to my cousin's third, fourth, whatever. When we go to a wedding, when we get it and we really enter into the celebration with somebody, right? I think of like being in part of a wedding party or a best man or a maid of honor or something like that, right? If we're like there and we know the people and we go because we we want to celebrate the power that is this moment in life. Because at a wedding, a couple come before an altar, right? Typically in the church, right? Like when they come before the altar, this couple are both looking at each other saying, I am willing to give my everything to you. I want to give everything that I am to you. With the idea that this person is going to respond by saying, I want to give everything back to you. And the whole purpose of this exchange, of this giving back and forth, this life as gift, right, that is lived out by these two people is meant to point us to heaven, right? It's meant to point us to the faithfulness that God has, right? Like, that's the reason why a wedding is such a big celebration. Because there's this exchange of persons, there's this exchange of love, there's this I do, I give, I open up, I lay down, right? I give everything that I am for the sake of you. Like that's the promises that we hear in a wedding. I freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully give myself to you and hold nothing back. Why would Jesus choose to do his first miracle at a wedding? It's because he's communicating this same thing. The same covenantal gift, the same covenantal language, the same covenantal fruitfulness, faithfulness, but this same covenantal kind of vow and promise from God to humanity. Jesus is saying, God, right? I'm like, God gave his son so that we would know like the love that he has for us, right? Like Jesus, by his very nature, by his very mission, by his very person, is going to walk the earth, do all of those things that we talked about earlier. Why? So that he could communicate God's love and say, I'm here to make a new covenant with you, my people. So that your land would not be heard as forsaken and desolate, as we heard about in the first reading. But that you would be espoused, and your land, land would be espoused, and you would be called my delight. Jesus' entire mission, the entire purpose for Jesus' coming is to be able to reveal the love that God has for his church, the love that God has for his people. And he's going to say, at the same way that a bridegroom at a wedding gives himself completely to his bride, gives himself completely to another, right? He says, I give completely everything that I am to you. Like God gives completely everything that he is to you. And if we ever doubt it, we just got to look at the back of the church. Because what is a crucifix but a symbol of God giving completely everything to his people? I hold nothing back, even my very self. In the Holy Land, I was 8-9 years ago now, I was able to go and the space where there's Calvary, the place that's been venerated for 2,000 years is Calvary. There's still like the place where the cross traditionally has been understood as to have stood, where Jesus died on the cross. It's actually in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And what they've done is over the hole, they've built an altar. So it's a really, really beautiful thing. You can do like the way of the cross, and you actually end up at the place of the crucifixion at one point, and you can go down and you can actually put your hand in the hole, which is really, really powerful, really, really amazing kind of moment. So it's like the altar's kind of high, so you got to kind of squat down, and you can like lean over and actually put your hand in the hole. Underneath the altar, though, there's an image. There's like the same way we have like the image right here. There's an image, though, against the wall, and it's an image of, it's an icon, and Jesus is sitting, he's bound, his hands are bound, he's got the crown of thorns on, he's got the red kind of sash or red cloak over his shoulders, and he's got a reed in his hand. So it's the spot where the soldiers were whenever they were making fun of him and mocking him, calling him, King of the Jews or whatever. They have this image though where Jesus is arrested and he's like being mocked. But the name of the icon is stunning. It's Jesus the bridegroom. Because it's a reminder, and even like today in the Holy Land, there's a reminder that this is where Jesus gives that self-gift. This is the moment where Jesus, right, communicates his never-dying love. This is where he lays himself down for the sake of another. He makes a covenantal vow with the church. I think it's also impactful, right? Like not just the setting, but also the water. Because the reality is that God had communicated with his people before, right? Like all throughout the Old Testament, there are multiple times with Abraham, with Noah, with Moses, there's multiple times throughout the Old Testament that God makes some kind of covenant with his people. And he says, I'm not going to do this, or I am going to do this, or my people are going to be faithful, and I'm going to be faithful, and we're both going to be faithful, and we're going to do this together. But there's something about the water, right, that the old covenant had grown stale. It had grown nasty. It had grown gross. It had been abused. It had been beat up by the people. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to establish a new covenant. The same way that I establish new wine, the same way that I bring about new wine from gross, broken, stale water, I can bring about a new covenant from the gross, broken staleness that has been our salvation history to this point. But the interesting thing is that Jesus is not going to just do this covenant from water to wine, which is a miracle and really, really is powerful. But like at the end of John's gospel, he's going to then take wine and say, no, this is a new covenant marked by what? My blood. So take and drink. The reality is when we come to Mass, is that Jesus is re-ratifying, is re-establishing, is continuing to establish over again the same covenant that he established 2,000 years ago on the cross, the same covenant that he promised at the wedding at Cana. That same covenant is being established and re-established and re-ratified with me and with you every time we come to Mass. That as we approach the Lord, Jesus says again, this divine I do. I give myself completely to you again. And no matter where you find yourself, where you might think, my land is forsaken, my land desolate. You might think right now, man, I feel pretty freaking forsaken, Lord. Because life ain't easy. Or there's struggle, or there's sin. Or I'm desolate, like I've been praying, Lord, and nothing's coming up. Or I've been praying, and it just seems like these things keep spiraling out of control. My relationships, or my work, or my whatever. I don't know what I'm doing through 6 months whenever I graduate school, whatever it is. Like, Lord, I really don't know. I feel forsaken. I feel desolate. I can't hear you. My prayer's dry. Whatever it is, right? The Lord says, no. I continue to give myself to you. In this covenantal yes, in this covenantal gift. It's been promised all the way since the wedding in Cana in Galilee. And it's continuing to be offered and ratified today when we come to Mass. May tonight as we come to church, as we come to the Mass, as we come to receive of the Eucharist, that we come not with this sense of, not with this sense of just obligation or duty, but that we do so open to the covenantal grace that God has for us. Open to a God who wants to give himself completely to us again. Because this is why Jesus came. There are plenty of ways that he could have started to reveal his glory to us, but he chose to do so at a wedding at Galilee. Why? Because he wants to give himself completely to his church, completely to you and to me. May today we say yes and receive of this covenant and offer ourselves back.